Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. My name is Perryn Keys. I'm the executive sports editor, joined today by Scott Rabalais, our venerable longtime columnist, and by Wilson Alexander, who's got a big smile on his face, and he should. He's back. We got him ringed up. Wilson, give him the Angel Reese.
Oh, yeah.
Joe Burrow. There we go. Wilson, congratulations to the highest order here at the top of the show for young Wilson Alexander, who tied the knot with his lovely young bride, Elise Alexander, now on Saturday in New Orleans. So we are over the moon by that. And also somebody, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention somebody who is very much behind the scenes, who our viewers and listeners and readers probably don't know, but Tanya Ramirez, our night sports editor, she got married also on Halloween night down on Tuesday night in New Orleans. And if you knew Tanya, you would know that is the most Tanya thing of all time. So congratulations to her as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Champion Wealth Strategies. To learn more, go to championwealthstrategies.com. We appreciate them coming aboard. Alabama Week is here, gentlemen. This is the big Dukaroo, the big event of the entire year. LSU will tangle with the Crimson Tide at 6:45 p.m. Saturday in Bryant-Denny Stadium. LSU started as a 5.5-point underdog. It's been bet down to 3 points. The over-under is 61. Plenty on the line, and we will get to it all. But, gentlemen, welcome in.
Thanks for having me, and thank you, Perryn. Perryn was at the wedding and I think had a good time. It was a lovely affair, and I just want to say thanks again to everybody who's reached out and congratulated us. We've been overwhelmed by all the love and support that we've gotten.
I was at a different wedding. I was invited to Wilson's wedding
season.
But open date week, we were invited to 3 different weddings that we wanted to be at. So I picked the one that my son was at. Wilson's like a son to be, but my actual son was in town, so I went to that one.
Yeah.
Wilson, by the way, we should mention, he's too shy to say so, but he was very appreciative of all of you who showed up and announced. The guy in the beer helmet, I thought that was a nice touch. The 16-ounce Budweiser. You didn't see me. He was in the back of the pew.
Oh, okay.
He didn't. None of that's true. Nobody crashed the wedding. A bit of business here first. Before this thing gets all the way off the rails, a bit of business here. If you're tuning in, you know the Advocate's always been the number one destination for LSU football coverage. This podcast is just another great way for us to bring this coverage to you. We're here every Monday and Thursday. We will be here all the way through the end of baseball season. We will be live on Monday and Thursday on our social channels and our YouTube channels. And if you don't catch us live, you can catch us on YouTube at the NOLA.com channel, at the Advocate channel, all of our social channels. Subscribe to the Advocate. Please do if you haven't already. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. And get a hold of our newsletter. Our LSU newsletter, Rab handles that 3 times a week, but it's a daily newsletter. To sign up for that, get all the latest headlines, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. Okay, so, gentlemen. 6:45 p.m. Saturday. It ought to be a real show. We found out on Monday that LSU is going to be even more shorthanded than we thought they might be. They will not have Mekhi Wingo, as I'm sure everybody knows by this point, and will certainly be thin in the secondary. So that'll be the first topic of discussion. Wilson, I will just put it to you. We now know, and LSU is known for quite a while, they're going to be thin in the secondary, a little bit thin on the defensive line. What does LSU do to sort of cover up those weaknesses, deficiencies?
Well, first of all, it's figuring out exactly who's going to play in those spots. Of course, without Zy Alexander on one side at cornerback, LSU's got an opening there and has to replace the person who's been the most consistent cornerback to this point. Zy had started every single game. He was the only corner who had done so, and he started playing, at least his best football, at this point. Was it at all SEC level yet? No, but he was getting better and led the team with 7 pass breakups. Certainly, he will not be playing in this game. The buzz is not very good for the rest of the season as well at this point. The Brian Kelly has not sort of confirmed anything like that. And so, he's certainly out this week, and now LSU's got to figure out who's going to play in his spot. On the other side, you got Sage Ryan. He's going to be out there. On one end, though, Is it Ashton Stamps? Is it Jeremiah Hughes? Right. Is it even Javian Toviano, who, at one point in the season, Brian Kelly said that he was likely a redshirt candidate. And now all of a sudden you're so thin that is he someone who, now that he's switched back to corner, does that redshirt opportunity sort of go away because LSU just needs guys to play? We'll have to kind of see that over the next month here. Or even LaTerrence Welch, who Kelly hasn't mentioned as much as the freshman. But Stamps would maybe be the pick. He's come back from an injury himself after missing 2 games. He's already got to start this season. He was the one who came up in preseason practice and really rose up the depth chart. And so, in terms of covering up those deficiencies, it's interesting because LSU plays a lot of zone. Mm-hmm. That probably won't change too much, even with the different personnel. Might even be more important to play some zone. You got to make sure that you're communicating well in that instance. But what they've done with that is being able to try to take away the deep shots. That's going to be vital against Alabama. I don't know if we're going to get into that a little bit more later.
Especially Alabama, yeah.
But and also in terms of covering up those deficiencies, got to get some help for the secondary from the defensive front. A guy like Jordan Jefferson stepping up for Mekhi Wingo, Mason Smith, Harold Perkins, Omar Spates. These guys in that front 7 need to have a really big game. They need to sort of disrupt what Alabama wants to do offensively. And Jalen Milroe has been a pretty good quarterback under pressure. But if you can at least get after him a little bit, this offensive line at Alabama is inconsistent. And that might be LSU's recipe defensively for getting enough stops to win the game. You're not going to completely stop them, I don't think, especially with what LSU's dealing with defensively, but you just need to get enough stops to win.
I would say at the risk of being mean to the players who are injured, but as Wilson said, let's look at Zy Alexander. He hasn't played no one in the LSU secondary has played at an all-SEC level. It's not like you were losing, say, in 2019, Derek Stingley to a big injury or something like that. You can replace him in terms of talent, but of course it's the experience factor. And I think even if he played, I guess the point I'm getting at, LSU would have given him some big plays anyway. Mekhi Wingo, not probably playing quite at the same standard as he was last year. He's been injured all year and finally just had to stop playing, and get surgery and is going to be out for at least 6 weeks. Jordan Jefferson, Jordan, not Justin.
Yeah.
Jordan. Yeah, because with so many Jeffersons with similar names in LSU football recent history. Brian Kelly said it was graded out as the best defensive tackle over the course of the season. And that didn't surprise
against
me.
Army. He clarified later against Army.
Yeah. But of late. So playing well, and then you've had other players like, on the defensive line like Parashan and Braden Swinson and stuff like that. Improve, and Mason Smith has gotten better, though not playing at a dominating level either. But I guess the point is these guys can be filled in for, and considering the level that LSU's defense has played, it's not an enormous drop off. But as you said, other players do have to elevate their games for LSU to get the stops they need to win this game.
The other thing that it worries me is about tackling, because LSU. The game in which the secondary was really shuffling was Ole Miss. Denver Harris had become a starter and then didn't play in the first quarter, and then ended up playing in the second quarter and the rest of the game. But Zy Alexander in that game got hurt. He had an ankle sprain, and he was in and out of the game. And I don't even think he finished that game. And so you had a lot of Ashton Stamps and LaTerrence Welch playing out there at cornerback. This was before Sage Ryan had been moved back outside to corner. But that was the game in which LSU struggled the most tackling. I remember 34 missed tackles by LSU's own count in that game. And so replacing Zy Alexander and sort of that's also something that could be a concern and maybe ends up being the thing that decides who starts there is who is the best tackler, because LSU, in order to limit any sort of big explosives plays, just needs to tackle well. Right. You might not be a corner who can go out there and really play the ball well in the air and come up with some big interceptions, that kind of thing, but at least tackle well in order to be able to get off the field on third down in particular and limit the explosive plays.
Make sure that a 7-yard gain does not turn into a 23-yard gain. This Alabama offense it's odd. I don't know of a better way to put it. They obviously struggled coming out of the gate. Jalen Milroe got benched for being ineffective against Texas, and then they went down to Tampa and played at South Florida, and that was maybe the worst offensive football that Alabama's played under Nick Saban. Since then, though, I think a lot of people Alabama's still not running the ball very well. They averaged 3.3 yards per carry against Tennessee, averaging 3.7 yards per carry on the season, and the offensive line has allowed 35 sacks, which is a lot. But they're averaging. Let's see, where am I at here? I'm missing my notes here. But one way or the other, Jalen Milroe has absolutely. He's sort of righted the ship. They're getting the most out of him, and he's playing a whole lot better. He's completing 64% of his passes, 1,600 yards passing, 13 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. This stat blew me away. He's averaging 10.7 yards per attempt, which I think we would all agree that maybe their sort of short passing and intermediate passing game is so-so, but he throws a really pretty deep ball. So I suppose with all of that in mind, with an Alabama offense that's a little bit hard to figure out, but for the long passing game, how do they go about defending these guys? How do they make sure that Alabama doesn't blow the lid off the defense and start really blowing them away?
So we got a question for our weekly mailbag this week that sort of relates to this, which was, would they be better off basically overcommitting to the run and leaving the DBs out on an island and risk giving up the big play? I would say no, because you risk basically letting Alabama have its strength on offense.
Right.
Jalen Milroe, like you said, that's second in the country in yards per attempt. When you look at the tape, there's been some really pretty deep balls. He's got at least one completion over 40 yards, I think, in all but one of the games he's played in this season. He has been really effective downfield. One throw in particular stands out. Rewatching the Ole Miss Alabama game a couple weeks ago was a 40-plus yard touchdown to Jermaine Burton, in which Jalen was getting crushed as he threw the ball, and laid it right out there for Jermaine Burton for a pivotal touchdown in the second half. That's what's so worrisome about what LSU's dealing with right now in the secondary, is that you've got this deficiencies maybe and these uncertainties certainly, and
their weakness is Alabama's strength.
Exactly, yeah. And it's like you don't. That's a tough spot to be in, what LSU's dealing with defensively right now because of Alabama's proficiency with throwing the ball deep. You don't want to make them be able to just rely on that strength the whole way through, and so I don't know exactly what they have to do in order to avoid those things, because Alabama's going to hit some deep balls. It's a matter of trying to make sure they don't hit so many of them that you can't get off the field and you can't get stops.
So are you dropping Harold Perkins to help with coverage? Or are you making him spy and blitz on Milroe more about? To me, no matter who's playing, if Alexander and Wingo were playing and all that, you're going to go some big plays and some points. To me, the key is for LSU to disrupt as many Alabama possessions as possible to give your offense, your potent offense, time to score enough points to win the game, which you probably have to be in the 30s or maybe 40s. Again, like
none of us thinks this is going to be like 21-17,
right? or 24-10 like Alabama
in the first quarter.
Or 24-10 like Alabama beat Ole Miss. That doesn't seem likely either. So what are you doing with Harold Perkins, who is obviously the biggest factor?
That is a fascinating question. I asked Brian Kelly on the press conference yesterday. Basically, since Harold Perkins has been moved out to that Sam linebacker nickel role, is it even still possible within the defensive structure? Because Brian Kelly's talked so much over the last month about, okay, we've settled on our 4-down front and our defensive structure, and this is what Harold is going to do. Within all that, is it still possible for him to be a spy? And he said yes. He can drop, he can blitz, he can still spy, particularly on third down is when that would come up. And so I'm fascinated to see if they do that with him, because they haven't really at all this year, especially not since the Florida State game, and as a result of moving him to that sort of nickel Sam linebacker. But the thing is, Milroe isn't somebody who has been a big runner this year, but he can take off in those situations, and he's also able to extend plays to set up some of those downfield shots. Harold was incredibly effective against Bryce Young last year in this Alabama game as a quarterback spy. Of course, he was doing a lot more of that last year, but maybe that's something that they consider doing with him, is in those third down situations, to keep Jalen Milroe contained in some way because of Harold's speed and athleticism. But he's also been a pretty good downfield coverage linebacker over the last month or so. Like, he's gotten a lot better in that regard, particularly since about the Missouri game when he had that interception. He's got a few pass breakups. So the long answer is, I mean, I don't know because I'm not in the coaches' meetings, but it's an interesting question and something to consider in this game is, do you use him a little bit more as a spy and blitz him more than you did previously? Even though like you kind of got to give up. It was interesting because a while ago, Harold playing in coverage was like a thing you didn't want. And now it almost sounds like, well, you don't want to lose him in coverage sometimes because he's been really effective in doing so over the last month.
I guess maybe my opinion is is colored by what else you did in 2021, which they just rushed with abandon. It seemed like most of the game, and it was very effective. And they only lost 2014, a game that they were really outmanned in, and really had a great chance to win. I would be aggressive, because you kind of, I don't want to say you have nothing to lose because that's not true at all for LSU, but you kind of like you're kind of forced into a position with this defense, like you got to try to be disruptive, and maybe you create a turnover or a 3rd and 28 or something like that, and that's what you need to do to win this game.
And speaking of the linebacker play, just real quick, like this is going to be the first chance where we really get to see what Omar Speights is about.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something that influences what they can do with Harold, because he is someone who on tape we saw at Oregon State was able to play sideline to sideline, play a little bit in coverage. And this whole season, the defense was a mess completely in the Florida State game across the board, and he didn't play well either. And then he got hurt. Mm-hmm. And in the last few games that he's been back, LSU's played these very one-dimensional offenses where he's played well, but okay, how real is it? This is when we're really going to get a chance to see what he's about, and if maybe that's somebody who can influence this game a little bit as well.
Are they better? And I'll ask you, Wilson, ask your opinion. Are they better suited to? Let's say that Nick Saban and Tommy Rees, the Alabama offensive coordinator, went into the open week last week and said, "Well, who's the team that had the most success against LSU? Ole Miss. Ole Miss just ran, play after play after play after play, 88, I think, in all." And got LSU's defense going side to side. And they were, as you saw, they were 100% gassed in the fourth quarter. Is that something that is that something that Alabama would consider doing? Do you expect them to try to do something like that, go tempo on them? And if so, is LSU better suited, given what you're saying about Omar Speights and Harold Perkins playing better and so on and so forth, maybe even the defensive line playing a little bit better? Are they better suited to be able to handle that? And when I say handle that, I don't mean holding these guys to 10 points. I mean, 30 instead of 55. I don't know.
I don't expect them to do too much of that because it's not something they've done a ton of this year. They haven't been like a major tempo team like Ole Miss is. And even though they had the bye week, I would be surprised if they just completely broke tendency and all of a sudden we're an up-tempo kind of offense. That would be a shock. Similarly to LSU breaking some kind of tendency and playing a ton of man coverage and blitzing. Mm-hmm. That's not something that they've done much of this year. And so it would be a total break from what they've done. So I would be surprised if they did it. If they did do that, I don't know if LSU's better handled. At linebacker, it's probably better suited to be able to do so because you've got Whit Weeks waiting in the wings.
Right.
You've got Speights is healthy now. When he was playing against Ole Miss, he didn't finish the game because he was clearly still hurt. And then, you've got Harold settled and you've got Greg Penn. And so at linebacker, yes, but then at defensive tackle, no, because Mekhi Wingo's out.
Right.
And so now your depth is taking a hit there. The depth is certainly better than it was last season, but now you're down a guy who's been one of your best players when he's healthy. And so I don't think they would be able to, on the defensive line, your rotation is going to have to be a little bit more shallow, or you're going to have to get more out of Jalen Lee and Jacobian Guillory in order to keep rotating guys. So I don't think on the defensive front that's something you want to have to run into.
Rab, you made your point that, hey, let's, if you were a defensive coordinator, if you were the one holding the whistle, let's go after him. Well, I'm gonna go blitz him. I'm gonna try to make him uncomfortable. Everything. I would take the counterpoint and say I would try to keep everything in front of me, knowing that you're probably going to give up some big plays. I mean, it's going to happen, but Try to keep everything in front of you. Tackle. Make Alabama try to, again, Alabama's given up 35 sacks. This is not a vintage Alabama offensive line. Make them, play as disciplined a level of defense as you can, and hope that in making Alabama go down the field in 12 plays, 10 plays, 8 plays, 13 plays, whatever it is, make somewhere along the lane either they give up a sack and get behind the chains, or they commit a penalty and get behind the chains. And again, therein lies your crucial stop that you need for LSU to go down and score and get ahead and stay ahead of the ball game. I don't know. I was going to save this for a little bit later, but I'll just say I find it I can't quite figure this one out. The line moved. It was the very, very early line 2 weeks ago started with Alabama by 7. It moved to 5.5 or thereabouts. It's now down to 3. I for the life of me, I'm not going to lie, I can't figure this one out, because what that says to me is that you have probably some smart bettors going with LSU pushing down the number, and I'm not. Without saying, I'm not in any way saying that I don't think LSU is capable of winning this game. I'm a little bit surprised by that, given the fact that the injuries, the secondary, all these types of things. What do you suppose? What are they seeing that I'm not seeing?
Obviously, a prolific LSU offense that has and a somewhat improved defense that has kind of made people feel like Alabama is not going to be able to keep pace. It's very interesting. I heard one of these Vegas guys on one of the local talk shows this week. He said he was all ready to bet on LSU at 5.5 or something like that, but now he's kind of thinking, well, I got to bet Alabama at 3, and I can understand the logic in that. You think Alabama's going to win a close game. That's my pick for the game as well.
We'll get to that.
Close game, but I suppose it's that. Look, the Alabama offense, while dangerous, they're kind of like an NFL team in that they're not going to score all the time. They have to bide their time and they strike.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then they just kind of go away. They have not played a full game this year. They've really not played a full game effectively this year in the manner that LSU has against a lot of teams. Now, conversely, LSU is playing the best defense they'll have played, but it's that inconsistency that I guess makes Alabama look a little vulnerable, but it's very surprising. I mean, they're basically saying on a neutral field this would be a pick'em game, and LSU would be a favorite at home by a little bit, which you kind of figure as well. So it's just not a vintage Alabama team. I mean, it's a team, they're 8th in the country. They only have one loss. They're undefeated in the SEC play, but they don't look like a team that's going to win the national championship.
But I will say this, mark of a good coach, right? Getting better as the season goes on.
For sure.
Wouldn't you, if you were an LSU football fan, wouldn't you have loved to have Alabama on the schedule on September 16th?
I was thinking that earlier this week. I said, when Alabama, when they played Arkansas or something like that.
Right, sure.
Yeah, that would have been like, yes, a much better spot to catch Alabama in, because they look bad. As you said, they look bad. Not just they were off. They look bad against South Florida.
Yes.
Which is a bad team on the road. Why they played that game, I don't know, but on the road. But they have improved, as has LSU. I think you have to credit both coaches and both coaching staffs and both teams for that. So it's always a fascinating spot on the schedule, and that you get Alabama, but it would have been better for LSU in September.
And speaking of schedules, we will discuss that here in a moment. This is the LSU Sports Insider podcast, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. You know where to find all our writers' great work. That's at theadvocate.com. If you have not subscribed yet, please do. Go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. It's theadvocate.com/subscribe. And get a hold of our newsletter. To do that, you can sign up at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. Again, it's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We're here every Monday and Thursday. You can catch us on all our social channels at theadvocate and NOLA.com. Catch us on our YouTube channels at theadvocate and NOLA.com. If you don't catch us live, you can catch us after the fact on those YouTube channels. So, gentlemen, how about one Jayden Daniels, who we've not really discussed in depth yet? Rab, you had a columnist up at theadvocate.com today about young Jayden Daniels and how this could be his Heisman moment if he's got a chance to have a Heisman moment, which he's definitely in the running. We know that. He's got the third shortest odds, has certainly earned his way to this point to having an invite to New York. But he can make his. I mean, let's just call it like it is, right? Don't we all believe that if LSU is going to win this game, it will be because that Jayden Daniels has had an exceptional game against a very, very respectable Alabama defense. Rab, just give us your 2 cents where this whole thing stands and what Jayden's going to have to do on Saturday night in Bryant-Denny.
Yeah, as I wrote in my column, the numbers bear it out that he's a legitimate Heisman contender. He's leads the nation in passing efficiency, and he's up to yards per game passing, and is tied for first in touchdown passes, and he's leads the nation in total offense and passing efficiency. He's up there in the top 3 in all these categories. But the Heisman is more than that. You need to capture the imagination of the voters. The two examples of the guys who won at LSU, Billy Cannon had his moment, of course, in a pre-television era. Well, pretty much pre-television era. It wasn't televised, but people saw newsreels. The Billy Cannon's 89-yard punt return in 59 to beat Ole Miss. That won him the Heisman right there. Joe Burrow, he had a Heisman moment early in the season at Texas on that third down pass to give. Was ended up being the deciding points in that game. And then he had another one against Alabama, a keeper late in the game that set up their last touchdown run by Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And he won it that day. When they carried him off the field, you knew they're carrying the Heisman Trophy winner off the field on their shoulders.
Yep.
Jayden needs a moment like that. 400 yards of – and look, he could still win it, and they don't win the game. I mean, he has 400 yards total offense and looks good doing it, and you're like, the defense let him down. He's still in contention.
I still think he's got a steep climb after that, though.
No doubt. But we've seen guys with multiple losses win it in recent years. Robert Griffith III and Tim Tebow.
Yeah, that's right.
And Lamar Jackson. We've seen it happen. But he's got to. If he does something that really, slipping away from a pass rush and he goes for 35 yards like he did against Missouri after getting hurt, something like that make the voters go, wow. Everybody watched him play against Florida State and didn't play great in the second half, and they kind of made up their minds then. But he has a chance to rewrite the narrative, and it's all or nothing, like it is for LSU in the SEC West race. It's kind of all or nothing. You're pushing all your chips on the table, and let's see the cards.
To me, I believe he's got to get him to Atlanta, and the only feasible way to get LSU
most
to Atlanta is to beat. Yes, most likely is to beat Alabama. Right. You obviously need to have help. Have Ole Miss suffer defeat, which would be we all think is the most likely.
There haven't been too many Paul Hornings in Heisman history.
No,
guys
winning a 3-8 record.
3-7 team or something like that and win the Heisman. Yeah.
But no, to me, LSU's got to make it to Atlanta. They need to beat Alabama to do so. They still would need Ole Miss to lose, but Ole Miss has got. We all think that they'll certainly be an underdog when they go play Georgia at Athens. They've got Texas A&M this week, which you still expect Ole Miss to win, but hey, you never know.
They played some really close games lately. They almost lost to Auburn. They haven't been quite as prolific on offense, so it feels like
everybody's played an inevitability games in the West.
Yeah, it feels like an inevitability, but then again, college football is funky, and maybe they get through unscathed again. But Ole Miss has looked like a team that is bound to lose at least one more game.
Alabama, didn't we all think that Ole Miss had a really good shot to beat Alabama to go into Bryant-Denny and win? Alabama, you were talking about Alabama not being necessarily consistent, but give them credit. They shut down Ole Miss and took control of that game in the second half. Same thing with Tennessee. Tennessee, as you mentioned several times now, had a chance to get up big on Alabama. Maybe squandered an opportunity, one or two or three too many opportunities.
Absolutely.
And Alabama took it to them. It's a weird thing if you try to figure out this game LSU-Alabama on Saturday night, trying to figure it out by common opponents. Well, okay, Arkansas took LSU to the wire. Arkansas took Alabama to the wire. LSU couldn't stop Ole Miss at all. Alabama stopped them cold. It's I'm sure you guys could think of some other common opponents where I don't know what to make out of. Looking back on it, don't you think that Alabama is probably a significantly better team than Texas A&M? But it took a tremendous game from Jermaine Burton to beat those guys. I mean, he won that game with 200-something yards receiving, almost single-handedly, at least as much as a wide receiver can do. But anyway, we're getting a little bit off topic here, but the SEC West race is still fascinating. I don't know. Wilson, anything you want to add about Jayden Daniels and what he's going to have to do on Saturday?
Well, yeah, in terms of like this matchup and specifically, this is an Alabama pass defense. An Alabama defense, like you mentioned, in general, has been pretty darn good. This is, Brian Kelly said, the best defense he thinks they'll play this year.
Yep.
In terms of pure talent, Texas A&M is also up there, but Alabama's been a lot more cohesive and effective on the defensive side. This is a defense that has not allowed anybody to score more than 34 points. That was Texas in the loss that Alabama had there. And then nobody scored more than 30 all season on this Alabama defense. And so Jayden Daniels is going to have to probably lead LSU and make LSU that first team to eclipse 35 against Alabama this season. and maybe even more than that. They might need to get to 40, which is wild to think about in an LSU-Alabama game. Got to score 40 to win, but that's just kind of where they are this year. And this is an Alabama defense that does a couple things really well. They've got a really good front that has gotten after the passer. They got 28 sacks this season, led by Dallas Turner. Chris Braswell's been quite effective as well, and that's what was part of what made them so effective against Ole Miss, was getting after the quarterback, after Jackson Dart. So the offensive line is going to have to do a great job. This is a huge game for LSU's offensive line in particular. They got to be able to protect the passer, and they got to be able to open up the run, because Alabama. That's what I mean. This LSU offense, part of what's made it so effective is that it's balanced, and yet Alabama's holding teams to a little bit over 100 yards rushing per game. I think that's 22nd in the country. LSU's got to be better than that. Even Texas in the game that Alabama lost, Texas rushed for maybe 2.8 yards a carry, or around 3 or something. That was certainly less than 4. It was not good. And LSU's got to be able to stay on track in the run game, because it opens up so many things and makes them so dynamic. Part of the reason for that is, this is a very long-winded way of answering your question, but is because Alabama has been really effective in the secondary too. I mean, Kool-Aid McKinstry is one of the best corners in the country. He's a semifinalist, I think, for the Jim Thorpe Award. Caleb Downs, true freshman, is not playing like a freshman in a defensive back. And when you look at the tape, there's just these moments when they play the ball, they play really good technique in man coverage. LSU at times has attacked teams when they try to go cover one. They see a one-on-one matchup and they just exploit it. But this is the best defensive backs that LSU has played to this point. And there may be some times when they just make a play, or they break up a pass or something like that. LSU is going to get probably challenged a little bit more on the outside than it has in any game this season. So this Jayden Daniels and these receivers, they're going to have to respond to that. We've seen them be an incredibly effective passing offense. Jayden has been fantastic as a downfield passer in particular. He's got to continue to be in this game. We saw Texas, 2 of the touchdowns that Quinn Ewers threw was over 35 yards, including the final score in that game was a 39-yard touchdown pass. He also had a 44-yarder. Jayden's got to be able to do those kinds of things in this game, not only just to win the Heisman, but to win this, or even staying Heisman contention, but to win this game, to be able to attack the Alabama secondary, which teams have rarely been able to do this season.
One thing we know about a Nick Saban team, one thing that Nick Saban has done even since before, Brad, you remember, even since before he got to LSU, if he's got 2 good corners, guys who he feels really good about, that allows him, and he's more than happy to get super creative in terms of not only coverages, but then how he winds up attacking the quarterback and or the run. That can, all of a sudden he gets real creative with blitzes and schemes, stunts, everything like that. And I think we saw that. You mentioned Dallas Turner in particular, Wilson. He's one that, just sort of stands out. Seems like every time in the second half they need a play, he's in the middle of making a play, whether it's a big hit, blitz, whatever it is, sack, what have you. So, we are, this has been for Rab. I'm going to need your expertise and memory on this one. It's been for as long as I can remember. LSU and Alabama have played on this first Saturday in November. We don't know that that's going to be the case as we go down the road in the future. It's been at least a decade now, longer than that LSU and Alabama both had the open date, and then they go and knock each other's heads off. And, what typically is one of the most watched, if not the most watched college football game in the nation for the entire year. Because of the SEC schedule, the uncertainty with it, we know that they will play next year, but we don't know when it's going to be. Scheduling is one of your favorite topics to discuss, so I'll just sort of let you. I'll turn you loose on that. What do you expect to see? What would you like to see? Do you think that they'll take any of this into consideration? They'll keep things where they are. Anything that this is a tough crystal ball to look into, because we really don't know what's going to happen with the SEC next year or in the years to come.
Right. This could take up a whole podcast right here. Scheduling. And this game is one of the thorny issues that the SEC is dealing with in terms of trying to figure out a new scheduling format, with Texas and Oklahoma coming in next year. If you go 8 games, the proposal is to have 1 permanent opponent and 7 rotating opponents. You play 7 for 2 years, and you play the other 7 for 2 years, and you've played everyone within a 4-year period at least once. But for Alabama, the permanent opponent would be Auburn, obviously. but they don't play. That means they don't play LSU. They don't play Tennessee. And the LSU-Alabama game has been for a decade or more the highest rated game, cumulatively in the SEC on an annual basis. Obviously, it's a primetime game. CBS, they're not just putting it on primetime because they threw a dart at the board. They think this game is going to draw a number, obviously, as it has many times in the past. If you go to a 9-game schedule, we've been told that LSU's permanent opponents, you'd play 3 and then you rotate 6 and then rotate the other 6, would be Alabama, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. Alabama, a lot of schools, and Alabama included, have balked at that schedule. Alabama basically because Tennessee's gotten good again. They're like, wait. We don't have to play LSU and Auburn and Tennessee every year. But the question
they had no problem with it for the past 20.
Yeah, right. So it's because they lost to Tennessee finally last year. It's I don't know about playing the Volunteers, but that's a big rivalry for them too. So LSU's problem with all these scenarios is everyone's got a bigger rival than LSU. Ole Miss has Mississippi State, Texas A&M has Texas, Alabama has Auburn, Florida has Georgia. That's another annual game that's going away. So we don't know. It depends if they stay with 8 or go with 9. Nick Saban, who has been a proponent of 8, who's been the one pushing back against this tough scheduling, maybe another indication that is nearing the end of the road for him as a coach. He admitted on the SEC teleconference this week that he thinks the SEC will eventually expand to a 9-game schedule. Mm-hmm. And that means you're not going to do a 1-8. You're going to have more teams that you play every single year. And LSU has been very...
They've been in that camp.
Yeah,
they're for that.
They've been very public the whole time. LSU, Scott Woodward, Brian Kelly, they want a 9-game schedule. They want to play Alabama every year. Kelly said it again this week as well. They've not shied away from that. So, the cynic in me says Alabama typically gets what it wants in the SEC, traditionally, especially when it comes to football, and that whatever schedule format that Alabama favors is what the SEC might lean towards doing. If LSU and enough other powers, want a 9-game schedule, then we'll see what happens. That way, Texas A&M could play LSU and Texas every year,
right?
And LSU could maybe play, a lot of rivalries go away. There are some going away no matter what. Anyway, annual rivalries: LSU and Auburn, LSU and Mississippi State, LSU and Florida.
Oklahoma, Nebraska it was scripture that they were going to play, and it was going to be one of the biggest games of the year. That's long gone.
And they were in separate divisions, and they played for 2 years, and they didn't play for 2 years. Yeah, and that was the biggest game in America. So it's a difficult issue. Wish the SEC would just make up its mind and do something. There's a lot of extenuating reasons why they might, but every other Power 4 conference, we can say it this way: the SEC and the Pac-12 are the only major conferences that don't have a schedule format at this point. The Big 12 just released theirs. Say, hey, we have all these new teams coming in. This is what it's going to look like through 2027. The Big 10, the ACC.
ACC just did it.
Yes.
Yep.
The SEC has not, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But this is a game that is one of those gems that it's proven the teams are. There's always something on the line, and they draw a good number. And you're going to see a lot of talent in this game. Guys are going to see play for your NFL team one day, and it would behoove the SEC. I think you would think ESPN would be like, let's keep that one going.
Yes,
let's find a format that keeps that one going. But it's going to take that extra game that is not as popular with half the league, basically.
Right. Next year's opponents are set for all the SEC teams.
Yes. But as you pointed out, not the dates.
Right. The dates have not been set, and we've already seen. This year has been it's been a break with pattern. With LSU's get. You used to. For years and years, as you remember, Rab, I guess basically since 1992, you knew that Auburn was going to be. It always felt like sort of that first really, really big game on the schedule. Mississippi State, a good Mississippi State team notwithstanding, and they were going to come in at some point in October, and then, in September, and then in October, Florida was going to be on the schedule. Well, now Florida's on the schedule in November this year, so it's. Changes already afoot. Yeah, that's right. Arkansas used to be at the toward the end of the schedule, if not at the end of the schedule. Those Friday games. I'm sorry, but those Friday after Thanksgiving games were nobody liked that. It was good to see that move off of that.
Arkansas,
Friday.
By the way, is a team that would, I think, like LSU to be as permanent.
Sure, that's a marquee game that they know they can sell.
And LSU is like,
right.
Arkansas, I don't know. It's very interesting. Obviously, what's one of the big hangups? The SEC did not negotiate a contract with ESPN and ABC that said they had to give more money once they added Texas and Oklahoma. And ESPN has been dealing with a lot of financial issues.
That's right.
I think they were described this week as a melting glacier.
Yeah.
There's even rumors
they don't have as much money as they once did.
And there's even rumors that Disney might sell them off, at some point. Then what does that do to the SEC?
Right.
Don't know. But the SEC that's part of the reason they're waiting to see, can they get more money, as they should, out of ESPN, Disney, ABC, to have Texas and Oklahoma on the schedule. You're not adding Coastal Carolina and Iowa State. You're adding 2 marquee programs. So we'll see where that all shakes out. The people at LSU, they're steadfast. They believe eventually they'll get to a 9-game conference schedule, but it ain't happened yet.
Right.
As a very, very quick aside, I know we're still in 2023 focused on this Alabama game, but seeing as we're talking about the future, I cannot wait for LSU's home schedule next year. I know we don't know the dates of every game.
No, it's a tremendous.
We know UCLA's there on September 21st, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, Alabama. Oh, it's perfect for the 100th year of Tiger Stadium. I mean, it's going to be fantastic.
It's a heck of a they're going to try to win the Pac-12 next year. Well, the Big Ten, I suppose. The Big Ten, Western Front.
Yeah.
One thing, speaking of obviously the 2023 and this big huge game, the biggest day on the calendar for LSU fans, the whole bit, which we should not overlook or bypass. I do want to come back around and ask you a question, Wilson. I'm putting you a little bit on the spot, but when young Reed was sitting in your chair on Monday for Monday's show, we did hit a topic very briefly about the potential for unsung heroes, so to speak. Mason Taylor would have been one, the obvious one, if we remember the last play of the game. But just generally speaking, so many times, with all apologies to the headliners, to Logan Diggs and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas and Harold Perkins, whoever else, to say nothing of all the playmakers on Alabama's side, sometimes it's the one person who rises up and has the biggest game, the greatest performance of the season in the biggest game of the season. If there were to be somebody, and we're a little bit throwing darts here, but we're making educated guesses. If there's somebody on that LSU roster who might sort of fill that role, who would it be?
Can I throw out a couple names?
Of course.
Okay, because I don't want to necessarily just pick one in particular, especially having not given it like extensive amounts of thought. Kyron Lacey comes to mind.
Sure.
Because if Alabama's secondary, like we were talking about earlier, is able to bracket and give some headaches to Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, then Kyron Lacey should be the beneficiary of those things. That's what happened in the Auburn game. And so he would come to mind on the offensive side. Maybe even Mason Taylor again could be someone. He has not had a big season, partially because LSU's just been throwing the ball deep, hitting Malik Neighbors, hitting Brian Thomas.
He's also been healthy. Yeah,
exactly. We talked to him earlier this week, and he said that he's finally feeling much closer to 100% than he was. And so if he is, able to be more effective, then maybe he's someone who's able to come up with a big play at some point. But I would still say Kyron would be my choice on the offensive side. On the defensive side, an unsung hero, maybe Savion Jones.
Oh, wow.
Someone we haven't seen this year who did not break out the way that it was anticipated that he might.
The way the coaches said they thought he was going to break
Brian
out.
Kelly said that he was going to have a, quote, monster year. That has not happened. He added a lot of weight in the offseason and said himself earlier in the year that he was only finding himself having to learn how to play with that kind of weight. But, this is an Alabama offensive line, like we said, that has allowed 35 sacks. Left tackle Caden Proctor, a true freshman, has been very susceptible in that regard. They're inconsistent, and maybe this is the moment when someone like Savion can break out and maybe really disrupt some things and have a game. If it's not him, then perhaps Pear Shand or maybe Braden Swinson. Some of those pass rushers would be another choice, I think. Yeah, OV2. Would I think be my choice on the defensive side because they could do so much for this defense if they were able to get after Jalen Milroe a few times.
Rab, I know we put this question to you on Monday, but is there any other wild cards you'd like to add in? So I would just say, you could have like an Ashton Stamps. I mean, look.
Or like Andre Sam, Major Burns.
Sure, these guys are going to be up against it. And it's a secondary that's been, derided all year and has been very, very susceptible to the big play, obviously, all year. If these, isn't this sort of the perfect moment? The not saying it's going to happen, but it could be a moment in which, somebody like an Ashton Stamps or whoever who has not been relied upon to make huge plays, all of a sudden has to make huge plays on the biggest stage and winds up coming through. LSU's going to probably need something like that. Rab, anything else to add on that?
Alabama sees him in their nightmares, I'm sure, from the 2-point pass he caught last year. But Mason Taylor has been somewhat overshadowed this season by just the brilliance of Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. But he gives you that other dimension. Can you see them clearing out the secondary? Sending Thomas and any of those three, Thomas, Lacey, Neighbors, whatever, deep, and it clears it out for Mason Taylor to go over the middle and the nice, he's not likely to break a 60-yarder, but a nice, 10 to 15, 20-yard gain. Mason Taylor is someone that I think could be more of a weapon in this game. And I will add that I think LSU's balance has been the big key, and the big key has been Logan Diggs. Who,
yes.
You think it had him against Florida State? I know they lost by 3 touchdowns, but it could have been a different game. It could have been a different game, especially
that was not their night. But you make a fine
line did not block well.
No, but he's been a big reason that teams have to fear the running game with him and Jayden, and he's a nice addition. But I'll say Mason Taylor. Maybe having that game, that big game that when they're keying on other guys, maybe. You can't cover everybody.
Yeah. You mentioned Logan Diggs. He's not an unsung hero. I'm sorry, Wilson, but you mentioned he's not an unsung hero. But by the same token, you talked about Alabama's run defense as being very, very stout. One thing we know about Logan Diggs is he runs hard. He's going to have to run hard in a game like this.
And the offensive line, like we said earlier, is going to have to. That's where this really comes down to for me. Can the offensive line continue to get push up front the way that it has? For all of the bells and whistles from Malik Neighbors and all that on the outside and Jayden in the downfield passing game, it's not. We saw them against Florida State. This is an inside zone scheme that requires you to just beat the guy across from you. They do some double team stuff like that, but it's not exotic with counters and powers and pulling guards and things like that.
Misdirection,
you got to get vertical and get push up front. And we saw them in the Auburn game, which was between Florida State and now the biggest test up front. They were still able to do that against Auburn. But Alabama's going to be tougher on that regard. And the offensive line is going to have to get that kind of push up front because as good as Logan Diggs has been, he's also rarely gotten touched in the backfield.
Yeah.
He usually had 2 or 3 yards in front of him. They're just wide open. Then he's able to make some moves and be physical. And he's a great runner. This is not to take anything away from him, but more to credit the offensive line. And so they're going to have to be good. Also, real quick, just to wrap up kind of the unsung heroes thing, think back to the Alabama game last year. Obviously, the big play was the 2-point conversion. Jayden Daniels run at the end. Even the throw to Mason Taylor, the touchdown after Bryce Young had pulled off some heroics and taken the lead.
Great catch.
There were still so many plays throughout that game that were vital, made by like Major Burns, a possible unsung hero in this game. There was a big slant completed in front of him. He chased down the guy and then and tackled him before he scored a touchdown. And LSU, I can't remember if it ended up forcing a field goal. I think it did though. There in the red zone because Harold Perkins was disruptive, and so anyway, kept points off the board.
Yeah.
And Jarek Bernard Converse on like Alabama's opening possession, interception in the end zone.
Yeah,
things like that happened early ended up playing a huge role. John Emery's touchdown when he was just by inches stayed on the sideline and cut upfield. LSU's going to need guys. Those are guys who were not the stars of that team. But they made plays when it counted, even when they had given up, like on the Major Burns play, a big slant and a big gain. Were able to continue to hustle and make something happen in order to keep points off the board. You're going to need that in a game that we think is going to end up being very close.
I remember Josh Williams having he scored a touchdown and he sort of turned Jayden Daniels loose with a big block downfield.
It was on the overtime touchdown.
That's right.
It wasn't even his responsibility on the play, but he saw it going and he just Superman dove at the guy to take him out and give Jayden Daniels space.
Hopefully we get treated to a similar show compared to last year. So it's crunch time. We will put you guys on the spot. It's game prediction time. Gentlemen, before you pack up the car and head up to Tuscaloosa and make a little stop in Meridian, Mississippi on the way, what's your game prediction?
I said 37-34 Alabama. Certainly a game LSU can win. I just see them making one too many big plays that LSU doesn't stop. And Will Reichard, who hasn't missed a field goal this year, I don't believe. They finally have a really good kicker at Alabama. Jayden Daniels is going to lead them to a touchdown, tie the game. Alabama's going to come down and kick a field goal at the end. And once again, Nick Saban is going to be the scarecrow in the cornfield of LSU's football existence.
Before he heads off to Jupiter.
And then he's going to retire, folks. He can't beat Father Time, okay? He beats everybody else a lot, but he can't beat Father Time. He will retire eventually, and maybe this is the year, but I think it's a thrilling game. They certainly can go either way. LSU can certainly win the game. Just the losses that we've seen this week with Wingo and the secondary, it just seems a little bit too much to overcome.
Wilson?
I feel similarly. Part of me wants to see Jayden Daniels, score 45 and the LSU offense just be this unstoppable force. But when you have a matchup of strength versus strength, you're not going to probably win every single time. You'll win some and you'll lose some as well. And because of that, even though Alabama's offense has not been this fantastic unit, this is an LSU defense that, while it has improved against over the last few weeks, like you mentioned, what they're dealing with at corner and the loss of Mekhi Wingo, it just gives me pause to make me think that, okay, Alabama's probably going to get a few more stops on the defensive side than LSU will. And so I have a similar feeling about it. I think haven't picked an exact score yet, but probably something like Alabama 40, LSU 38. I think it's going to be razor thin. And Jayden's going to play fantastic, but once again, that's just kind of how I see it shaking out. I'm not able to get over those concerns because I think Alabama's defense is going to be able to do just enough to, even though LSU is going to have a great game on the offensive side, not quite enough to win in my mind. But like you said, maybe we'll be wrong.
If Wilson stays with that prediction, I've already gotten a sneak peek at Reed Darcy's prediction and Sheldon Mickles' prediction. That makes it 4 for 4 on Alabama's side.
Then maybe I'll switch.
That's actually probably a good sign.
If you pick it 40 to 38, you can go the other way.
Well, no, doesn't that seem like the kiss of death, though? Whenever, whether it's us or some other panel, picks one team all the way across the board, then it winds up on social media, 2 hours after the game, and everybody's dunking on us. So take heart. Listen, it should be a barn burner, as they say, not an actual barn burner like we saw at Auburn. No. But a thrilling game one way or the other. We will be here for it all. These gentlemen will pack up and head off to Tuscaloosa here shortly. We will obviously be there for everything as it relates to this. It's the biggest game of the year. It always is, and this one shouldn't disappoint. Stay with the Advocate all the way through football season, through baseball season, LSU women, LSU men, the whole bit. Subscribe to the Advocate. You can do that at theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. Get a hold of our LSU newsletter. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here every Monday and Thursday. We are live on our social channels, on our YouTube channels, And if you don't catch us live, you can always catch us after the fact. You can also catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever other finer podcasts are found. Easy for me to say. Gentlemen, safe travels. We will, as I say, we will be here for everything and anything LSU Alabama related. Stick with us, and we will come back on Monday to wrap it all up and figure out where LSU is headed from there. For Wilson Alexander, congratulations again in order for Wilson Alexander. And for Scott Rabalais and for Amelia Cotton behind the glass, my name's Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.